Okay, so first news topic of the week. We're going to be talking about Star Wars Outlaws, or more specifically, to begin with, Ubisoft Forward, which was like an hour long, 2 hour long event that happened earlier in the week. The final summer showcase. And skipping through it, there only appeared to be sort of two major pieces of content, Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed Shadows. Whole bunch of stuff on live service games and DLC, which I'm sure you were hugely enthused by, John.
I mean, I'll tell you this, Rich. You know I'm not a fan of those things, but those are already existing properties. And the fact that they're just continuing them rather than, using resources to make more of them, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Support those existing communities. I want those people to be happy and enjoy it. And they showed Rainbow Six Siege, and I actually enjoyed Rainbow Six Siege for a year or so. And then didn't keep up with it, and now I just would get destroyed, and it's probably no fun anymore. But at first, it was actually a game I enjoyed a lot. So.
Okay, fair enough.
So there you go.
Let's talk about Star Wars Outlaws, which was kind of like the major showcase event. There were two, obviously, AC, but Star Wars came first. And I don't think we can continue this discussion without talking about the ridiculous state of streaming on YouTube. I mean, bearing in mind that Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed have had so much investment in their massive amounts of development resource thrown at these amazing games, and yet the biggest summer showcase of the year, and it looks like trash. What's going on? This is just a real problem that needs to be addressed, right?
Yeah, I'm completely confused by this as well. So obviously, the thing about streaming right now is these services do actually support up to 4K 60 in a stream capacity. Jeff actually did this for the Summer Games Fest, but weirdly enough, the actual input resolution was just 1080p, and they were doing nearest upscaling, likely using OBS to the 4K feed. But even with that, though, you still got an improved bit rate, so the presentation wasn't bad. Xbox looked fantastic, I thought. Like, the stream quality was
great.
Was about as good as you can get right now, realistically. So that is a good example of what you should do.
Was that one live?
Yes, it did. I went on YouTube, went to live, and I had to skip through the live section to get to. Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
okay.
So I think it was live, not like a one of those pre-scheduled things. But then Ubisoft comes along, and I can't remember if it was just 10. I think it must have been 1080p 60.
Yeah.
But both on Twitch and on YouTube, the quality of the bit rate was so low, in addition to actual playback problems with the content, that made every game look choppy. There was visible tearing in some of the assets. All the detail was absolutely just ruined by the macro blocking. I would say that it actually made the games look outdated and bad, because at this point, the games have become so detailed that when you take away all that fine detail, you just lose sight of what you're actually looking at. And I think that's the case here. And I think they really, however they set it up, they need to fix it, because they did a disservice to all the games that they showed at this showcase. Ubisoft did. And I think it is quite fixable, but they really can't afford to be doing this, because anybody watching this is going to have a bad experience. It might look moderately okay on a phone screen, maybe, but if you're watching in any slightly larger window, it's just a mess of pixels and blur, and it was atrocious. And then I went back, obviously, for this and checked out these gameplay sequences from Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed, and it's like, oh, these games actually look really good. It's just you genuinely could not tell from. At first, I thought maybe Star Wars had a massive downgrade going on.
That's what a lot of people wrote online.
Right?
They were like,
but in reality,
they downgraded it. It's like, not really.
Exactly. It's like, maybe not. Like, maybe there is some details. We'll have to check. But by and large, it doesn't really feel that way when you see the higher quality asset. But when you watch the stream, you would think it runs terribly and looks a lot worse. So caution flag for anybody doing these streams. I know it's difficult for sure. You need a lot of bandwidth, but they had a whole stage. They can afford this. There are ways to do it, and they needed to do it because they're harming their own games.
Yeah, basically. There's something else as well. I mean, I have been away, so I came back this morning to check out the Ubisoft Forward, and I searched for Ubisoft Forward on YouTube. first result, you'd think it's the Ubisoft version, right? But no, it was GameSpot, the GameSpot co-stream,
right,
which didn't have any additional added value content. For example, commentators talking about what they're seeing. It was just literally a mirror of what Ubisoft had done. So that originally bad quality that was on Ubisoft became an order of magnitude worse because it was going through a second generation real-time encoding. And I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, and to the point where I had to sort of quit out because it looked so hideous. And then I went to the Ubisoft stream, which still had issues. And then I went to the gameplay trailers, which were, effectively uploads of the streams that were within the mainstream. And suddenly it looked a whole lot better.
Oh my God, Rich. You're right. Yeah. I'm looking at this GameSpot one now. And I'll tell you what I hate about this stuff, because it destroys archives for the future, right? We sometimes have to go back to old media that was released years ago. And obviously in the past, media quality was a lot worse. But like these types of low quality uploads really damage future discoverability for these old assets. It makes it look, it's unusable in the future. Yeah, like, this should not exist.
In what world in a search engine does a copy of the original actually come out on top of the original?
The new search engines of the world, AI-powered ones, love that.
AI, yeah.
Yeah, oh my God, this GameSpot stream. Oh, goodness.
Yeah,
it's an affront to mankind. It should be deleted.
Man, yes. So you can see what my initial reaction to Ubisoft Forward was not particularly positive, which is a shame at all. Because, well, actually, we'll go into the Star Wars Outlaws trailer, which was long, detailed, and kudos, actually, to Ubisoft for actually having faith in a game and gameplay to the extent that they can show it at length. Mm-hmm. A nice developer walkthrough saying what's going on. That's great. One thing which is slightly curious, though, going back to the technical side of things, is that it was 1440p 60 upload, which is odd. Says to me possibly they used NVIDIA Share / Shadowplay to record it, which may explain the judder.
Yes.
There's two things there.
There's judder, there's frame drops.
Yeah, there's stutter and frame drops, right? John?
It's 100% consistent with my experience when using NVIDIA Share. Unfortunately, you can get decent footage as long as you perfectly match the input and output refresh rates. But even then, you're still going to get some skips. But if, for instance, you're playing on like a higher refresh monitor and you're at 60 FPS locked if you're playing at a higher frame rate and then you're trying to record with Share and your Share is set to 60 hertz capture, you end up with just horrendous frame pacing, skipped frames, duplicate frames everywhere, all kinds of artifacts. And based on this and the fact that it's also ultra wide, which I assume is just, something they're doing for PC. Is the whole game?
This is the second time they've showed the game, and it was ultra wide the first time too. So I'm actually starting to think this is an ultra wide game.
Fascinating.
We talked about this last time.
Right.
When we this is last year around August, I believe.
Right. Yeah.
And we talked about it when they showed off Avatar. Avatar was 16:9, and this was 21:9. So I like the Shadowplay theory, but another theory that I have is actually that this is supposed to look like console footage. However, because
Alex, no.
Listen, seriously,
okay,
no.
Okay,
I'm not being. How do you say it? Glib or something like that. So Avatar, the last game, running on Snowdrop in its 60 FPS mode, which is what this trailer is, targets 1440p. Actually, it is 1440p output even. And they also, there's a number of points in the trailer where they show off things like shadows and stuff, or character reflections and things like that. And in the console settings, those things are kind of like noticeably lower quality. Sure. The highest quality presets don't have the errors that we see in this trailer in Snowdrop. So they're showing the game at some sort of medium-like quality. Characters are only handled by SSR. And if you look at Kay's shadow, like a really good example is at, I have a whole bunch of notes here.
I'm looking at it
at around 704 and thereafter. if you look at Kay's shadow, one of the things I pointed out when I was looking at Avatar is that if you use the console quality settings for shadows, your character shadow is actually really low res for the entire game. And that's something that isn't there at the highest quality that the game offers. I'm not even talking about like unobtainium quality. I'm talking about just like ultra. And there's a number of other things in the trailer, including the resolution. If you look at her hair, that actually really make me think that they're trying to present the game in a way as if it was recorded on a console. I can't say it was. It uses like Xbox Series X controller prompts or something like that.
It does.
But I think this is actually trying to look like the game as work in progress, which is why they have like vignette shots, for example, of where there's no camera control. Those are actually a perfect 60, where they show like, I don't know, like parts of Tatooine from like a super cinematic looking camera. That stuff's all 60, but when it shows gameplay, then it is immediately this weird, improperly paced, low frame rate thing. And I think what we're seeing is perhaps just work in progress build, actually.
Okay.
So, I mean, I can also send Ubi an email, but, I actually looking at this, they've released media before that is really high quality. Like the NVIDIA stuff they sent out is actually really super high quality. So I think someone at Ubisoft knows how to record something.
Well, I'm sure they do. It's just, so I'm still convinced that it might be a combination of the two, where I think you're absolutely right that they're capturing this at console settings, right? I think that makes sense. But just the way the frame presents, it doesn't quite look like just normal slowdown to my eyes. It has a much jerkier appearance to it somehow.
Yeah, that's what
I
think
mean?
too. Mm-hmm.
Like if it was just dipping into the 50s, it wouldn't present quite like this.
Well, I mean, that's why I said like work in progress. I think maybe it's not dipping into the 50s. I think it's probably dipping into the 30s or 40s just because it's bad build or something like that.
Maybe.
Well, whichever way you slice it, it's still not the way you want to present the game.
Right. It's a bad idea.
Millions.
Yeah.
Right. Like, especially even if, it still is in development, that's not the way to show it. And,
yeah, I mean,
it's weird. It's weird.
For sure. But other than that, other than the problems I'd say with frame rate of the trailer itself, there's a lot of other great image things that are going on that we've seen before in this engine, as well as some new things that weren't in Avatar. One of the interesting things I want to talk about there is that Avatar is like a first-person game, and it's actually kind of lighter on post-processing. It even, to the point where like, a lot of I think in the original version of the game launching, like they didn't have like even motion blur in the 60 FPS mode on console. Like they really tried to keep it like this pristine look. And here it's kind of the opposite. There's a lot of motion blur generally. And there's also, they added in a number of camera effects that were not at all in the original like Avatar Snowdrop version of the engine. For example, I think it's like at 825 in the trailer, you can see anamorphic lens flares, which Avatar didn't have at all, but it's like a staple of like the Star Wars aesthetic at this point in time. I actually don't know how many lens flares are in the original film. I actually don't think too many. They tried to keep them out of most shots, I think. But here it's definitely all over the trailer. Like whenever like some sort of large LED style light shows up on screen, you can always see a huge lens flare there, which is kind of cool.
I don't think it looks that good at the point where about 827, just due to the way it presents as the enemy walks through the door, it's like extremely noisy and just kind of glitchy.
Yeah,
it looks
I don't
glitchy,
remember
right?
that in Star Wars. It looks more like a J.J. Abrams style.
Right. Like as soon as she starts to shoot him, it starts flickering and behaving strangely where it just looks bad. So hopefully they fix that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, but usually like you try and like clamp it so it doesn't do that.
Right.
Another thing is that it's all 21:9, which is, I actually do think this may be a 21:9 game on console, because the last time we saw this, when they did this for any game, it was with Senua, and my goodness, that is obviously 21:9. Is that there's also like a really large vignette on this left-hand side of the screen, and so everything is looking like like super dark in the corners, and it actually gave me a weird claustrophobic feel when I watched it on a big screen, even though the FOV is pretty high. So I'm not exactly a big fan of that, actually. I don't like vignette usually in games.
It's a kind of interesting perspective to have claustrophobia on an ultra-wide presentation.
Well, yeah, it's like darkening in your peripheral vision. If you've ever, like John with VR, you know what that's like any sort of darkening there. Makes you feel tunneled almost.
It's pretty distracting, I would agree. But I mean, they probably are just trying to replicate the look of like a film, you know, with these filmic aspects. Whether that's a great idea or not remains to be seen. But
yeah.
So any thoughts on the actual content?
Yeah. Well, one thing I was surprised about was with the space combat, which I don't think we saw to the same degree before. Nope. Is that it's like an arcadey kind of shooter, but they still have aspects of like simulation games in there. They have lead pips on the reticle, which is something I've only ever seen in sim games. Like, because blasters in Star Wars are not like instantaneous travel. They have like a travel time.
Yeah.
And here in space, like, you're not shooting at the vehicle, but you're shooting at a UI element in front of the vehicle. And usually a lot of games would just either not show that or make it just flub it so that the character's just hitting where they're shooting. And here they actually added that in, which I think maybe will point to the fact that your ship is like upgradable and you'll have different type of guns on it at some point, because it's a not exactly a newbie friendly way to make shooting in a game, that you shoot some sort of UI element. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Cool.
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously what they're really trying to show is that it's open world, but it's also open universe, if you will. Have they specified how many planets are in this game?
They only mentioned a few, so I don't think they have. I'm sure there's more than...
But obviously one of the key things they're trying to do here is seamless travel from planet surface to space and then back down to planet surface. You know, they kind of hide the loading of assets in the atmospheric conditions around the planet, which makes perfect sense anyway. Obviously this would be a design decision on their part and a cool thing. I mean, we've seen there was that game Haven, Call of the King on PS2 even, that already did this like 20 something years ago, which was pretty nuts at the time. So people obviously make the Starfield connection, right? But Starfield, I think, is just a different beast in terms of what it's trying to do and how that engine works fundamentally, which made that tough. But I think it's cool that these guys have obviously prioritized that. I was a little surprised and bummed to see that once again we're going down to Tatooine. You know, it's like I'm still confused by this, given that in the films it's specifically referred to as like this, like it's in like the edge of the galaxy, nobody knows, you know,
backwater.
Nobody comes here. It's totally backwater, right? But if you watch anything Star Wars, you'd see it's like the most important city in the whole universe, because there's always stuff here, like everything's here. So I guess it's a bit of a nostalgia play, but whatever. It is what it is.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, what can you say? You kind of have to have it in there because, well, everybody knows what it is. And they, you know, in a game like this, you kind of might want to visit it. But I get exactly what you're saying. It's the backwater planet that's so obscure that they could hide Luke Skywalker there under his own name.
Yeah.
Nobody would notice. And of course Obi-Wan's there as well. You know, it's
he just happens to be there too, huh? Yep.
Yeah.
But I am interested to see what they end up doing with this gameplay wise, because you know,
well, there have been previews this week, right? And there were some pushback. There were some complaints that it was perhaps too much like Uncharted, which is kind of weird because the trailer footage doesn't really... I mean, you can see
Uncharted?
elements.
Yeah, that's what people said. But it's weird because it doesn't look like that in the trailer at all.
I think it was maybe a curated run-through.
Wait, that just massively boosted my excitement then. Because I actually like Uncharted versus like other Ubi open world games usually. So like that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is just the way they curated that particular content, because if you have got a vast open world game, then you kind of don't want to just give that to people for 10 minutes hands-on or whatever.
I can see what they would mean then, based on the combat footage where she's infiltrating that little compound where we were talking about shadows. That is Uncharted style kind of stealth and action stuff.
Yeah,
which I think
I'd agree with that.
It's an awesome fit. That's a really great fit for a game like this. Like I can't imagine seeing that as a complaint. I really don't get that. That's a really great thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
The mechanics look solid, and that's another thing, is that this is a massive game, right?
Yeah.
Both in terms of development and size, I'd imagine. Avatar, weirdly enough, I thought was like the best open world game Ubisoft has probably released in like a decade. It was genuinely really well done.
Yeah,
it definitely had some
Ubiisms.
Parts where it was padded out a little bit in some areas, but I feel like the overall design was extremely compelling and really well done. And I feel like Massive has become somewhat of a rising star for Ubisoft. They're making their most interesting and best games now, I would argue.
Mm-hmm.
So just given that pedigree and what we're seeing here and hearing as people talk about those mechanics, this does seem like this could be genuinely an amazing title.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Alex, this is like Avatar Snowdrop, right? Which is to say cutting edge, state of the art, ray tracing, the whole package basically.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the reasons why I think they're trying to show off console footage here, is because we know they're not showing off the full graphical package that they've announced. Like there's shadow maps all over the place here. The PC version, if they were showing that off, they would presumably be showed off with the stuff that, well, the PC version won't have shadow maps on its highest settings. It'll use ray trace shadows, based upon the NVIDIA press brief and this trailer there. So there's that I thought was interesting, but nonetheless, there was an interesting moment. I'm going to go back to the sneaking around part there, where once again at 7:04, when I showed off that, I said, oh, Kay's shadow, the main character's shadow, is kind of low res there. But interestingly, her shadow is intersecting, it's sharp edged with a shadow from the mountain or hill behind her that is very soft. And usually that implies some form of penumbra shadow is in usage there. And I found that interesting because that's actually something that isn't in Avatar at all. Avatar just had really standard shadow maps, and then distant shadows were done a different way and terrain shadows were done a different way. But I thought that was interesting because either that's a tech upgrade or just some sort of visual artifact that makes the game look like it has physically based penumbra shadows, which was kind of cool.
Okay.
Another thing that I noticed is that at 2:20, when Kay gets on our ship, there are one thing that Avatar didn't have was it didn't have reflections on glass from RT, and they used real-time cube maps, which was interesting. Here, when she gets in the ship, at least from the inside perspective of the ship, doesn't look like there's any reflections on the glass at all, and that surprised me a bit. So I'm curious what they're going to be doing there. I definitely see
what looks cube mappy when she runs right up to it. You see something sort of sheen off the glass.
Does it not change at all, I'm presuming?
It doesn't line up with anything.
Yeah.
There's also the noisy lens flares there too.
Yeah, not so hot, those lens flares, in terms of how stable they are. And the last thing I wanted to comment on, other than that there's a lot of obvious scenes in the game here, there's one section, once again, when she's sneaking and they find her, a door opens up and you can see the light spill into the room, which I thought looked really great. There's also a red awning above, which is actually bouncing red light on the scenery around it in that exact same scene.
Right next to that, where it really shows the benefits here of this GI solution, where you see the occlusion shadow kind of around the frame of the door, right? But in the area that's fully lit by the sun, there's no such thing. If this was just SSAO, you would see that you'd have occlusion shadows everywhere, regardless. It would just look like an outline shader again.
Yeah. And one thing that I know from their presentations at GDC is that they're actually changing the GI for this game specifically because the probe system that they had as the fallback for Avatar has issues with large indoor scenes. Which Avatar doesn't have. And it also has issues with aligning with small, thin walls. So all of these structures are small, thin walled structures, something that is really not in Avatar at all. And so they're having to change it to accommodate this world. So they're already doing bespoke stuff for just this game. But one thing that I wanted to point out that I still don't think looks great, but I don't feel I care at all, but it is a little bit off-putting is that the cutscene animations sometimes, like the character, like the main character at 9:44 when she talks to this sheriff or whomever, like the character model is a good looking character model, but like when it starts animating in these cutscenes and starts talking, it looked so awkward. I don't know if you can present that in a different way where you don't have to show the character talking so much. Maybe you just keep it behind, like the character, like you only see the back of the character's head, so you don't actually have to see them talking or something like that. Do like an A/B shot to avoid it. But I think whenever they show the main character talking in this game, in the last couple trailers, it hasn't looked too great, and it almost looks uncanny. And that's one thing where it's hard to fault the game for that, because I actually don't want devs to spend too much money on useless cinematics that do not necessarily enrich the whole experience. But it is a little awkward given how everything else I think looks really, really, really great.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I guess that's everything we got to say about Outlaws then.
Yeah,
I would
sure.
say that's all
For
we
right
have to
now.
say about that.
Well, hopefully we'll get to have a closer encounter with the game. I don't know when it's coming out, though. It's fairly soon, isn't it?
I think it's August 20th or something like that. It's like
August
late
30th.
August. Oh my God. So it's right around
Jeez.
a billion other games. We got Black Myth Wukong, we got Stalker 2, we got Space Marine 2, it's like all there. I have no idea what we're going to do. Cry. Clone myself. It's what
It's
I
going to
really
be awesome.
want.
I mean, the stuff we've seen in terms of NVIDIA enhancements, I'm also looking forward to as well. It should be pretty cool.